We actually have quite a range of folks here. We have Patrice, who's a producer, irrigated ag producer, and a ditch rider.
Nice to see you again.
We have Pat Mulroy, as everybody knows, former head of the Big Water Agency, Southern Nevada, big player in water policy and well known. We have Jennifer Gimbel, our Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Interior, overseeing the Bureau of Reclamation and USGS. We have Tom Kay, who's an ag producer and in the forefront of many of the things that we're talking about. And of course, we have the environmental community represented by Cary Denison, and Astor is back on the stage as head of the program that can put a lot of work on the ground. So here's Dave.
Well, hello again. So here's the deal. We want to kind of change the pace a little bit, I think, become much more interactive, and look back at what we heard today and what it might mean, try to reinterpret it and get some exchanges going, not only between me and the panel, between the panelists, but of course having you also ask some questions, and comments are most welcome. So what I wanted to try to do, set not really ground rules, but put some bait out there for you all to pick up and make some fertile comments. But before I do that, I just again want to kind of go back and reiterate what I heard today, and maybe have you think about what you heard and how it might fit with some of the conversations. Early this morning, we heard about Godzilla El Nino, and we heard we should not be bamboozled. It's not going to be the cure-all, be-all. And in fact, what I wrote down is that Godzilla is not coming to eat Colorado's lunch. And then Pat helped us understand what is going on in California is a story of missed opportunities and lessons, and best beware, best pay attention. And then Jennifer, of course, helped us understand life through the federal lens, and that there's a whole lot going on, and you're going to hear a lot going on here in this panel. And we're going to try to bring that federal perspective down to the ground and what it means for producers like Tom Kay and Patrice Alonzo. We heard at lunchtime that the glass is half full, and maybe it's stabilizing. Maybe it's not a doomsday scenario. That's what I took away from it. Eric and Dan mentioned that hydrology will probably dictate almost no matter what we do, at least in the upper basin, but that demands must be managed. We also heard from Ken Nowak. Dr. Nowak told us about the water imbalance and how we might close that gap. And the quote that I wrote down, which really struck me, was, "There may not be a silver bullet, but together we can create some silver buckshot." And then, of course, Astor helped us understand that the NRCS has some really good resources to bring to bear. We're trying to do that. And that there's security in there's food security, water security leads to nation security, is what I got from a lot of that. And of course, we want to be a big part of that. So what I'd like to do, having that sort of look back, is ask our closing panel to sort of help us reflect and start with a very brief statement about what they heard, what they think in terms of a few themes. I kind of assigned a few themes for our panelists, and rather than going through each of the themes, I think everybody's kind of on track. I'm going to let them tell you, and then I'm going to ask them some questions, and we'll get going. So I guess since we haven't heard from Tom Kay and Patrice, maybe we can start with them first. You haven't met them. I'd like them to sort of, and Cary Denison. They are, I should mention also, very big players in the RCPP Lower Gunnison project. That's why we asked them to help give you all their perspective on what this means. And so maybe I can just start with Tom Kay first and have him regale us with some of his thoughts.
Is this on? So first I should start off by apologizing, saying I took the morning to finish my farm chores, so I haven't been here all day to reflect on everything that's happened. My perspective on the RCPP, since I'm part of the Lower Gunnison Basin Project via the No Chico Brush Group, has been multifold. For myself, I farm about 200 acres in the North Fork Valley on the North Fork of the Gunnison River. I chose for primarily economic reasons, not political or other reasons, to get my ground certified organic. My interest is trying to integrate some of the programs that are coming up, the system conservation program, with conventional farmers that can take advantage of other programs like the organic program that I think we recognize is growing huge. The organic field is not just made up of what is typically construed as organic growers. You know, I'm a typical row crop with the same farm tractors that everybody else does, and I think there are opportunities for people in that field, combining with some of the programs that are coming up. That's enough.
Thanks, TK. We call Tom K TK for short, and I'm DK, so that really confuses things in our group. But Patrice is somebody that I'd like you to get to know. She's been sort of an up-and-coming star in my mind, and helping us with the Lower Gunnison Project in kind of an overlooked area, I think, in the Crawford, Smith Fork Basin. Some people might say, Smith Fork, what's the Smith Fork? Well, it's the Smith Fork of the Gunnison River. So with that, Patrice?
So I'm Patrice, and I started out here as just a regular irrigator and went from there to working for one of the ditch companies. What I've gotten so far out of all of this is that we really need to try to pull together and work towards educating people using the different sources of funding that we have. I also work for one of the conservancy districts that's a partner with the RCPP, and we've been involved in that since the beginning. We've seen it progress, as Dave said, a little bit slowly, but it is progressing, and we're all very excited about seeing it start to put the projects forth. And we've worked quite a bit also with the salinity projects. We've put in one project, and we're going to do another one this winter, and then we just recently got funded for a third. So that's my background towards most of the irrigating and agricultural part of it.
Thanks, Patrice. And then down at the end of the table, Cary Denison comes from a long line of irrigators, and also, I guess, probably sport fishermen. But so he represents Trout Unlimited, and maybe a few words from Cary.
Thanks, DK. So to kind of bring this back around to what we started with this morning was what's happening in California and how does that affect us. My thought on that, from listening to Pat earlier today and from a field tour that I took with the River District to the Imperial Basin and the Palo Verde Irrigation District in California, primarily our point of that trip was to kind of investigate and look at the fallowing programs that were happening there. And it really drove home the fact that we're all in this together, that what works down there can work up here. The fallowing was interesting, but what was more interesting to me was the modernization that's happened on agriculture. We happened to get there right after a rainstorm, and we didn't hardly see any water in any of the ditches. There wasn't, you know, there was farming, and then there was not farming. It was a very clear line, and their use of technology to deliver water more accurately through the system to Lake Mead, to Parker, the integrated communications between the irrigator and the water managers to the Bureau of Reclamation as an example of technological application and innovation that's being used to modernize their system and address water shortage concerns is something that I'm hoping is slowly coming up the river for us, because from a Trout Unlimited perspective, of course, we're concerned about drought conditions on the Colorado River system. Of course, we're concerned about increasing demand and decreasing supplies, because in the middle sits these valuable fisheries that, you know, tens of thousands of recreationals and our recreation community depend on here in Colorado, and it really creates the backbone of our natural resources here in Colorado. So the better that we can manage our water supplies, whether it's through demand management or whether it's through on-farm efficiencies, on-ditch efficiencies, and once we start tracking those efficiencies and those water savings, even if it's minute, back to the head gate, so that we are actually leaving water in stream in a time and amount that we're not adding to our consumptive use or adding to system loss in any way. You know, water conservation is never going to be a silver bullet, but the incremental gains of a lot of practices throughout the landscape certainly are going to make a positive impact, not only on agriculture, but our water future. And so that was one thing that I saw in California. I'm seeing the genesis of it here with the RCPP, and that's something I want to see carried forward as we keep working with ag producers in the Denison Basin.
Thanks, Cary. Great comments, of course. I think maybe we'll come down to this end of the table and go back to sort of the federal perspective and then start the free-flowing dialogue. And, you know, for Astor, you already hit on it. Productivity equals security, again, is what I was getting at. I was wondering whether you wanted to maybe expand upon that and how we can continue in the face of strong projected population growth, how we can continue to see that trajectory upward on productivity and what we should do with the monies that you have to dispense.
Yeah, and thanks. We definitely, when we're looking at the water security, food security, and I'll go back to say just a few more things that really tie into this whole scheme of things. And, you know, it goes also to our soil health, and the management of our landscapes is really key in a lot of work that we do, because even in drought situation, soil health plays a key role to where when you do receive the additional rain or whatever it might be, you have that water holding capacity. Ties in greatly with any time you're irrigating, you know, and that is a benefit. If your soil is healthy, then you will use less water at that particular time. So I think that is a key point that ties into this whole scheme of the security when it comes to agriculture and how we can actually use the water more efficiently. Take a look at, you know, the RCPP, what we're trying to do here. We can take a bigger look at the watershed, the Colorado River watershed, and see, we know some areas where we actually are fallowing. And what opportunities do we have to do with those particular areas that are fallowed now? How are the impacts of the agriculture associated with those landscapes? Are there some things that we can learn? Is this an opportunity to look to different crops that are less water consumptive in that particular mix as we bring some of those acres back into production as well? So I think it's still a lot of discussion that we need to have as we try to address this here particular issue when it comes to our water security and how it plays into our food security as well. So I'm sure I can add more, but I'll give way to my colleagues here.
Thank you, thank you. As we go down the table, to Pat Mulroy, it makes me curious about the role of technology, and I understand from your bio that you're exploring the role of technology in optimizing the use of water resources, and that's kind of a big push in our Lower Gunnison project. And I was wondering if you could comment on the role of technology and what we're trying to do and how that might be a key to our success.
I think technology is absolutely key to the success of any conservation program. And it doesn't matter whether it's technologies that are now being developed, and I have to say this, I mean, most of us only have in our careers looked at technology developments as those emerge here in the United States, and we wait for them to have been bought by one of the large manufacturers. For the urban area, it would be like a GE or a Siemens, or somebody who builds the pumps and the pipes and the equipment. But there's a whole new approach out there that is really showing a lot of promise. we are now reaching out at developing RFPs around technology that we need, and we send it out to the world. There is a whole generation of new technology that is right now, it has gone through the venture capital stage, it's gone through the laboratory stage, it's ready for field testing, and it needs that validation by somebody that it works. So there are groups that come together that, and I'll tell you, I mean, there's an organization called Isle Utilities, and Isle combs the world for this technology, then brings it into your region, and it's based on what your kinds of needs are, and it comes from all over the world. And you then can listen to presentations, kick the tires with your technical team about this technology, and if it's interesting enough to you, then you can sponsor it and be that field tester for it. We just did that with a 24-hour-a-day leak detection system on the Las Vegas Strip. Now, we've got a really low leak rate anyway, but we found it in Israel. It's an Israeli company, and we've tested it, we installed it, and it is now up and down the Las Vegas Strip. So when we think about technology, we've changed our paradigm. We're not just looking at what are the manufacturers offering, but where are those next generation technologies that companies that may want to do business in the United States, that want to come in and begin to sell in this market, where we're going to incubate these innovators so that that next generation that we so desperately need gets a kickstart, because all the technology we need isn't there yet. So the more we can do to build a bridge between the innovator who has gotten to the venture capital stage and his validation of his or her technology to where it is attractive to be manufactured in a larger sense, I think that's going to make a big difference in helping us move technology development forward.
Nice. Well, Jennifer, well, first, thank you, Pat. Jennifer, that sounds expensive. That sounds difficult. I mean, obviously, we want to engage the private sector and make it a for-profit.
No, it's not expensive because the venture capitalist has paid for most of the technology development.
Well, it takes a lot of investment. And what I was going to ask Jennifer about helping us make some of that investment, whether it's in the M&I sector, or more importantly, maybe for this panel, the ag sector. How can we roll out technology when it is pretty expensive, the paybacks, the rate of return, or the length of return on your investment is long, and what's the role of Interior and maybe Department of Ag together to address that?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because we at Interior, actually in several agencies, I think, Esther, you might be doing this in NRCS, we're starting to look at those financial applications and creativity within what we do in the government, and how there are a lot of investors out there. Pat's right, there are a lot of investors out there, and it's a matter of connecting up with them. And that's one thing we haven't been good at. We're looking at it in reclamation. Reclamation's doing an infrastructure study. I think you probably heard about it. They just did a webinar here a few weeks ago, where we're saying how can we ourselves create partnerships that allow us to get the infrastructure fixed like it should be. It's old infrastructure. We need to fix it. And the technology, yes, it's expensive, but USGS, NRCS, we all have our scientists working very hard, and we base our decisions on that science. And we're getting better about that. So yeah, it's expensive, but I think you'll see that we're starting to explore easier or more unique ways of handling that, rather than a grant from the government or a grant from the state.
Yeah, I would just add that, yeah, we're definitely doing similar things like that. As I mentioned earlier, Conservation Innovative Grants ties into that as well, but the proposals that companies present to our organization on issues that are known nationwide when we're dealing with phosphorus issues loading in Lake Erie or whatever, when we were dealing with issues in the Chesapeake Bay or salinity here in the Colorado River Basin. There are folks and companies and entities that are wanting to help address those issues, and they're bringing those proposals to the table, and we're open to receive them, vet it, and then run it through the system and see, does it work, how can it work? We're definitely willing to try it on a small scale and then adapt it to a larger scale as well. So those opportunities are things that we're looking to continue to do, and it pays dividends as we move forward, so definitely.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, innovation is a big part of the Lower Gunnison project, and although I didn't show a slide on it, TK is I think one of the more innovative growers, and has started to look at implementing some technologies, but his neighbors are not. And TK, maybe you can tell us what motivated you to do so. What do you think we can do to get a wider adoption rate of these technologies and change in practices?
From the producer's point, I mean, the technology, when you can add it, it really has to show up in the bottom line in terms of production. That's really where the producers come from. We're interested in it. Luckily, there's a lot of innovation going on in the Lower Gunnison Basin with the Nochico group and the CSU research that's going on site. Myself, I converted, my original farm was about 200 irrigated acres, and I converted all of it to sprinklers, knowing that, you know, down the road, I couldn't predict a drought, and if I could, I'd go to Vegas and play their slots, but it was clear that there was, you know, water was going to be a serious issue. So converting allowed me to irrigate what was 200 down to 100, 165, 170 acres without a fear of the loss of water. The next step for me is trying to integrate some of the technology that's out there, and we're doing that with water sensors, moisture sensors in the ground. To me, I think a lot of the water issues are related to soil health, and we're trying to improve those qualities from a producer's point of view, so that we're putting in soil moisture monitors to really understand what's going on subsurface rather than what's just coming out and putting out, you know, so many acre feet. A lot of times we're finding out that people are irrigating when they don't need to, because technology will be allowed to say, okay, my pivot will be tied to my moisture monitors, and it actually will turn on when the moisture goes down to a certain level. That technology is there on the ground level for producers. In my case, we're going to tie the next level just to a smartphone and be able to just turn it on and off, so that I can be anywhere knowing that, hey, I'm in Denver and it's pouring rain over my place, I can turn the pivots off. I think that's going to be a benefit. But producers, you know, about technology and about like pivots and upgrades, I really haven't been doing this very long, maybe 5 to 10 years, and that's nothing compared to some of the people I've been exposed to, the John Harolds, the Mark Catlin's family. Those people have really been around farming a long time, and they understand what water's doing. But producers in general, I'll say this off the cuff, they don't like to talk about their water any more than parents of teenagers want to talk about sex. You know, the truth is, you know, they don't like to do it, but it has to happen. And it's been really slow to take hold, not just technology, but even discussions about water. We really just, you know, the producers I know, they'll go on to next year. If there's a water shortage, they'll do something about it at that moment. But I think there are enough innovator people who have gotten involved with Nochico, the RCPP, it was CSU technology and the grants that we've gotten that have opened up the eyes. Cover cropping is another one. It used to be a few acres. I think this summer it'll be over 1,000 acres in the Gunnison Valley that people are starting to cover crop. That's soil health. Soil health will lead to better water use and less water use, producing more. So those things, I think, from the producer side, are out there. It's just a question that you've got generational changes that are slow to happen. That's what I've seen in my short stay on the Western Slope.
Thanks. I want to stay on the same theme and maybe bring it to the mutual ditch company level. Patrice, you, like TK, have sort of got into it recently, but have seen a lot of things in an amount of time, and also probably seeing a lot of resistance to change and implementing technology, although you have been successful in the salinity program. Maybe you can talk about your experience as a ditch rider. You manage water and have to chase the water up and down the system based on rainstorms and ag demands. So if you could enlighten us a little bit about what you're thinking.
Sure. Well, going back to what TK said, one of the things that we've looked at as a partner in our CPP is trying to get into some automation on the ditch side of things. By doing that, we hope to be able to not only manage our ditches a little bit better and have that water be more efficient, but then also give real-time usage data to the producer so that then they can take that information and use it from year to year to know exactly what's going to benefit them during different parts and different seasons of the year. One of the reasons why it's something that's been important to me is because I work with a ditch that covers over 17 miles. So to be able to do changes at the beginning and then make them effective at the very bottom of the ditch can take a lot of time. And by hopefully introducing new technologies and also putting in these new systems, we can move that water around a little bit faster, a little more efficiently, and also make a big dent in making that production level go up for the individual on-farm user. We've also worked quite a bit with trying to bring a lot of the small ditch companies together through our conservancy efforts. The Crawford Conservancy is a group or a board that's represented by several ditch companies, and over the last couple of years, I think that we've seen an interest in bringing all of those ditch companies together, as Dave said, kind of come up with a master plan, which is a huge goal for us, so that then anything that the individual ditch company does can benefit other ditch users and hopefully be a collaborative effort to do everything efficiently from the top down to the bottom rather than just do it in pieces. Our CPP has been a big goal for us in that area because we know that we can start using those funds to cover the areas that salinity programs don't necessarily cover, so that we can work hand in hand and get those projects up and running and have them be both productive and efficient, and also hopefully control the water, maybe control the type of return water that we have, which is a big thing with us up there, because we of course are where it starts and we want to send it back in good quality that we got it in. One of the other areas that I would like to see happen is just being able to get your on-farm users to start working together and seeing the benefits of the pipelines, the pressurized systems, and that comes from talking with your neighbors, talking with each other and seeing, like Tom Kay does, where he's started out with a brand new system and he's been learning from it, and then he can hopefully go to his neighbors and teach them the best way to use it. Those are all really big collaborative efforts to bring all of the different small pieces together and get them to work in one organized unit, so that then these other outside interests like California or Arizona can benefit from the small changes that we try to make.
Nice, well said. And the topic I want to pick up on next, you mentioned, is sort of the education and what some people are starting to call social norming. And when they see their neighbor behaving in a certain way and society starting to bend that way, it really changes behavior. And I know, Cary, you've been involved in trying to educate and engage the agricultural community and also even recreationalists, I mean, in your efforts. And I was wondering if you could not only talk about the role of education, but maybe, and I just have to throw this out there, I mean, the environment and recreational water users, some might say, are sort of the Rodney Dangerfield of water right holders. I mean, they get no respect, right? And your job is really to help bring that respect and to change the behavior. Is that right? And how do you think that's coming, and what do you think we should do in our RCPP?
That's a lot of questions, Dave. And I knew he was going to use that Rodney Dangerfield line. I knew it. The social norming thing, that's one of the things that jumped out from John's discussion today. And that's why I asked the question of, do those visual indicators actually change people's behavior? And what we're talking about in agriculture and water conservation is change. And it's an uncomfortable discussion most of the time. It's an uncomfortable discussion even for conservationists who are TU members or TU even employees or people that are make a living on the river. Seeing things change for the better sometimes is uncomfortable. We irrigate largely still with ditches that are 100 years old. Most of us still, and I include myself, still flood irrigate. When I irrigate, I use a great big canvas dam, and I want to move to a sprinkler, and that makes my neighbors nervous, and it makes everyone else nervous, and it's really hard to get to that point. And one of the benefits we have in the Gunnison Basin to get to that end is our biggest problem, that's salinity. So we now have the haves and the have-nots. We have the haves that are like the Clipper Ditch, like part of Tom Kay's system, like parts of the Fire Mountain that have salt under them that can be improved so that you can provide pressure to the farm so that farmer can then more easily screen their water or go to a pivot or go to a drip system with reduced inputs. But those the rest of us who don't have that opportunity, we have to start putting, all of us, when I say we, the collective, we have to start putting more emphasis on water conservation and applying the amount of water, delivering the amount of water that is demanded by agriculture, and getting more technical about how we do it, and making that water conservation end up back in the most effective manner so that it's really addressing the resource concerns downriver and locally. How do we get to that point? It's tough to say. I think the best example, and I'm a project person, not an advocate, so my approach is always, well, let's do something and make someone look over the fence, and I think that's how you make farmers and water managers most comfortable with change, is to show them that the sky didn't fall once you applied new technology to irrigation and water management. But I don't want to overstep my plea to everyone that we have to also concentrate on water quantity, not just quality. I really feel that the Colorado River Basin, and especially in Colorado, we only look at consumptive use through the Excel spreadsheet view, where there's water consumption only on farms, and there's something else, and all we have to do to get water to this other box is to zero out this box. And in between, there's a big story. As T. Wright mentioned, there's return flows, there's other users in the system, there's important fisheries in between. We can't just dry up some farm ground, see an immediate benefit somewhere else. We have opportunities to grow lower consumptive crops, as Astor mentioned, change the way we irrigate, use soil moisture monitors, change the timing of deliveries, do all these other things, have near farm storage that can, in the long run, reduce the amount of water that is on the whole leaving the system. And that can be a tough conversation to have with an irrigator who's been doing just fine irrigating the way his grandfather or great-grandfather did. It's a tough conversation.
Well, it is a tough conversation, and I think since you used T. Wright's name, I'll use it again. It's the adult conversation we're having today, and we want to continue having. And I guess maybe it's a good time to go out to the rest of you adults out there and see if there's any conversation that you want to throw this way for the panel, or actually let the panelists talk amongst themselves. I've got a few more questions here, but before we go too far, check in with you all. I see a bunch of hands, and I'll let Hunter pass and Mike. Yep. Let's go with Steve Schrock first, and then T. Wright.
I have a question for Mr. Mulroy and Ms. Gimbel. You've heard some descriptions of agriculture in this area, the RCPP project. I'm really curious, after the vilification of agriculture nationally based on the California experience of water, how this message is going to resonate in your judgments from Western U.S. agriculture to decision makers of all sorts, just anywhere, Congress, state houses, and it seems to me that you have particularly interesting positions that I've thought of.
The story needs to be told. It can't just stay in this room. I think every opportunity any one of us has to speak, this story needs to be incorporated into whatever you're going to say. I've gotten very, very cautious about vilifying agriculture, because it's not agriculture's fault. I mean, let's be brutally honest. Conservation is not, yes, we have a problem, we need to conserve, you need to do it. It's, yes, we have a problem, let's conserve, we have to do it. And cities have just as much responsibility in that as agriculture does. And I think agricultural success stories, you guys, you talk amongst yourselves and then it never gets out there. And that needs to be the headline. The headline needs to be, look at what this ag district is doing. Look at what this community is doing. Look how they've changed their or improved their mantra in being stewards of the water resource, and these are the conservation measures they've taken. It needs to get out there, and once it starts getting out there, it'll get legs.
Yeah, and I was struck by Astor's comment in his talk about food security, and it's a term that finally kind of came into its own. When I was a beginning lawyer in Wyoming and we talked about food security, most of my lawyer friends would just look at me and go, oh, that's because your family were farmers, you know. You know. And so it just, we do have to pay attention to the good stories that are out there. There does have to be conservation, but we also have to make sure that we are protecting ourselves and making sure that we're giving ourselves the food we're going to need. And so, I agree with what Pat said. The story's not getting out there, and it does need to get out there. You see dead almond trees in California, sorry, and it's tough.
And let's be honest about why that whole vilification's happened. It is all part of the Bay Delta fight. It is the environmental community, because ag is hurting so badly in California. They don't want them to be the good guy. So they're pointing at them and saying, look, they're really the villain. That's all political mumbo jumbo. And it's part of that intractable fight that is at the root cause of this whole thing. That's where the momentum's coming from. They're putting it in blogs, they're putting it in the press, and they're beating the tom-tom. That's the genesis of it.
Cary, I appreciate your acknowledgement of the return flow system we have, irrigation, the system of irrigated agriculture created on the West Slope has an equal tie with environmental values on the riparian river system. And I'm curious, and they've all evolved, but I'm curious with this RCP project. I can see where in lower Denison there's some real applicability to what you guys are looking for. But I really question whether or not that's your same approach is the approach to take the upper Denison or the upper Gimbel or Eagle or wherever. And I'm curious as to what you all are seeing, because as I look at the upper green where the conservation community is actively advocating to pay farmer or rangers up on the upper green in Wyoming to continue to maintain those artificial wetlands, which are the irrigated
Right, those are good points. And to be quite honest, even within our RCPP projects, we're not treating every piece of ground, every ranch, every ditch system the same, because we have to understand that return flows from one farm may be the supply for the next farm, and might be the supply for some other user downstream. We have to really understand that not every piece of ground is the same. And I've always made the argument that it isn't just different amongst basins or sub-basins. It's different from ranch to ranch and farm to farm. I can say that return flows off my neighbor's place that go into a different basin are certainly not doing any good for the creek, because it's going somewhere else. So if he became more efficient, diverted the water that he needed, and it would put more water in the stream. And as a former water commissioner in the Upper Gunnison Basin, I understand how return flows work and why they're important for downstream users. Yeah, one size does not fit all in the conservation field. However, I think the more we understand what return flows are, where they're important, and how they relate to different irrigation practices and demands and uses, we'll get a better idea of where we can apply technologies and structural improvements and management plans that will improve stream flows, reduce temperatures in specific areas. You know, I understand the return flow thing, but I will say one thing about it. It's not water positive. On the whole, inefficient irrigation is still inefficient irrigation. And what works on one guy's place doesn't mean that it's going to work in the next guy's place. So we need to understand that, all of us, and really focus in on the opportunities that we have and make sure we don't miss those.
So T-Wright asked about return flows, and since I irrigate with pivots, there is no such thing on my ground. So I get out of that question. But I think what I have more of a comment here, and maybe it's a question that people can take away. We've heard a lot about the RCPP today. We've heard about innovation on the ground, trying to get things done quicker, EQIP. I'm the recipient of a fairly large EQIP project that I think was very successful on my farm. But sometimes the aspirations and the intentions don't always match up with the realities. And I think it's important for the national level and the state level, since we have them here in the room, for two things. One is, I think our local offices sometimes feel that the RCPP is in competition with them. And I think it's important that they get that word that it isn't, that we're really here to bring more people into giving better understanding about irrigation efficiencies and upgrading. It doesn't always mean pivots. I think we talk about sprinklers, but sprinklers don't mean center pivots. Sprinkler means side rolls. Sprinkler means big guns. Sprinkler means just a different way of delivering. I think people have to understand that. And I think the other comment is we try really hard to get these programs implemented, and sometimes, you know, which requires somewhat forward thinking or new thinking. Sometimes it takes a new model. I don't think we know what those models are, but the people who have been doing this for years tend to fall back on the old models, and that keeps things stifled. So the question earlier today was, how far along are we with the RCPP project? And we're not as far as we want to be. And I think that's not by anybody's intention. I think it's just by falling back into old habits. So I think for the powers that be, I think it's important to hear that, you know, think a little bit, not outside the box is too much of a cliche. Obviously, you've got rules and regulations, but some things you have to say, let it happen. It'll work. We know what we're doing. We know what we want to do, and we encourage them to do it. And I think sometimes you've got to move forward without all your T's crossed and your I's dotted, and things will happen. And I'm hoping that can happen here in the Lower Gunnison Basin project sooner, because this is the first of the beginning. There's plenty of these great programs, but if they don't get implemented and they get languished in, you know, we'll call the bureaucracy, people will lose interest, and that inertia is really hard to overcome. So I just say that as a comment.
This comment or question is directed to Tom. And I think Patrice and maybe Cary. It seems to me that in Colorado and many of the western states, we have family
So let me make sure I just understand. So because you've got these water rights that you've had for generations, and you're thinking that because of having that water right and switching over to a more efficient watering system, then you might lose some of that?
Yes, in part.
Okay.
It's like, what's the expression? If it was good enough for my father, it's good enough for me.
Right.
And on our ditch, I'm confronted with that periodically, and sometimes it is extremely difficult to get folks off the dime in terms of moving ahead. Now, Cary, you mentioned that you flood irrigate, and perhaps it is restrictive in terms of the cost to convert, because town, as you know, and as I know, because I've got a take-on system, it's not an inexpensive proposal. It truly has to be thought out very carefully. But I look at it as, again, if it's good enough for my father, it's good enough for me. And I wonder if that's getting in the way of progress.
And you're right, it does. It's a conversation that we have to have. It's certainly been working for generations, and a lot of producers have been able to make a living off of flood irrigation or the open ditch system. I myself also flood irrigate, strictly because that's what I was able to afford at the time. I see the differences in efficiencies, and actually even in the production of crops. That's where I've learned to try to talk to different producers, maybe even take them to some of these other farms and ranches to show them that this, maybe a side roll or a center pivot can move that water around a little bit better and actually gain them a higher yield because of it. One of the things that I've learned over the last few years is trying to look into some of these different programs and how they can work together so that then that on-farm system can become more cost-effective to that person. There are always going to be people who just feel that change isn't necessary, though. And the best way that I have found to talk to different people is just to continue to educate them, have a conversation with them. If they are dead set against it, then we just try to move around and maybe prove it in other ways. I have lots of different personalities on the ditch that I work with every day, and they teach me something new all the time. But in the end, I think that it comes from education and just having that conversation. You respect other people's opinions, and sooner or later they'll actually listen to what you have to say as well. That's just how I've been experienced with it over the last couple of years.
I think Patrice makes some really good points about that, and obviously has a much more patient approach than I do. It's something that I confront every day, and have confronted in the past, even before working with Trout Unlimited or on this RCPP project. It is a barrier. It's a barrier to change. That's one of the difficult things that we have to get around. And I think we have to start, in part, looking at what our water right is based on what can we do with it? What does it provide in beneficial use terms, in production, in whatever you need that water right to do. That is ultimately the goal of that water right, is to produce a beneficial use. And a water right is something that you can, use, but it's not a goal. This year is a good example. We had 3.5 inches of rain in May. You didn't need to irrigate, but my neighbors, their ditches were plumb full, and you'd ask them about it, and they said, well, I've got this piece of paper, and it's got a number on it. And I'm like, yeah, that's great, but it's tough to confront sometimes. But I think Patrice's approach of education and showing them what works, and that there's a different way to production, is the best approach.
So I'm on the end of 2 ditches. Both of them are 1904 and earlier water rights, so they're senior water rights, which is a comfort to me because I had analyzed before I actually jumped into this venture to know that it's there. But the thought of having those rights really never really didn't determine whether or not I converted from flood irrigation to sprinklers. It was mostly a factor, but like this year, but for May, our ditches would have a fraction of the water they had had, and who would be irrigating. You know, in hard numbers, I looked at it earlier, I'll divert 1 million gallons and really only need about 200,000 to actually run and grow crops. That's corn, beans, sometimes alfalfa, this year hard red wheat. And I don't look at my crops and say I've got the senior water right. They're going to make them better, because it doesn't make it any better. It's just what I can get out of it to grow those crops. So from my perspective, the water right, you know, when we saw it in California, you know, senior water rights were basically thrown out the window as far as I was concerned. And, you know, what will be the trigger here? Is it loss of power in Lake Powell, Meade, that someone's going to say, that's it for the water rights, we're going to federalize it all and take it over? I don't know. But, you know, I want to know that I can still have my lifestyle and my living, and I think my irrigation efficiencies improvements allow me to do that. It was expensive, but it would be more expensive if I couldn't irrigate and had nothing. My ground would be valued less. I look at all those improvements add value to the land. It may not be a bottom line dollar to me, but I feel very comfortable that I'm sitting on an asset that has value. The water right senior is a value too, but the improvements have much more value to my ground than the senior water right. And the ability to be able to irrigate. Again, but for May, and we've been in some thin years, essentially I used to need 1,800 gallons a minute to run my system, and the ditches wouldn't deliver that much. I've reduced it down to 700 gallons a minute. That's all I need to really irrigate. Now what happens in between is really the conversation that's going on in the room about where's that going. Right now it's being put into the system, and there is no intent to leave it up at the head gate. But I think that's just some of the conversations. So it goes by and back to the river, 7 miles from the point of diversion. But in my case, that's essentially what it is. It's a significant change.
Well, I think that's bringing us to the end of our program. And, you know, after a really great day, and again, appreciation to everybody to make it happen, we may not know the answer to the central question of will what's happening in California stay in California, but hopefully as you walk out the door, you'll feel like you're closer to that answer after today. Before you do walk out, please fill out the surveys, and please make sure you give our panelists another large round of applause.